You know, within the state government, we cannot resist but to create acronyms, right? Everything has to have an acronym because we don't like saying long syllables. And so one of the things we're going to talk about is the FROI. So it's the first report of injury. I will try and stay with the first report, but if every now and then you hear me slip and say the FROI, that's exactly what I'm talking about, okay? So the idea behind this wasn't that I didn't think that you guys couldn't fill out a first report, but there's a lot of interesting information on that first report. And from the standpoint of a safety guy, you guys are all attending today, and this is a safety workshop, and you guys are all going, okay, so Kirk, this is a safety workshop, and you're going to talk to us about filling out an accident form that's for insurance purposes. So how does that relate to the safety part of things? And so what I will tell you is that in occupational safety, there are several disciplines, okay? You have the safety people that are very good about doing training. You have safety people that do fairly well at going out and doing inspections. They can identify hazards for you and things like that. You have the fire department that has the life safety codes. You have the national electrical codes that are also part of NFPA and things like that. You also have industrial hygienists, and those are the folks that go out and take care of the health issues. You know, they're looking at those particular things that specifically affect people's health. It can be ergonomics, it can be substances, chemicals, those kind of things within the workplace. But one of the disciplines that are generally more attached to insurance is the fact that we do risk management. And part of risk management is that, okay, you don't want to have the accident, certainly didn't want to see anybody get hurt, but that's happened. So how do we improve things from that point forward? And one of the things that we can do to kind of further that discussion is actually kind of involved with the first report. How does that first report kind of give us some additional information? And so that's what we're going to kind of talk about, is how that kind of interacts with safety as well. So we're going to kind of talk about how this first report connects with us on several different levels. So where it applies with the insurance and how it applies to, it actually crosses over and deals with some of the stuff with OSHA, and it also gives us some kind of ideas of things to look at. Okay, so to start off with, the first report is actually the starting point. It's more than just a starting point in the fact that it is the foundation for everything that we do from the workers' comp side. So we have claims examiners and things like that. We have a lot of folks there at State Fund now that work these particular claims. And when I say work the claims, that means that we have more than just a claims examiner paying the bills. We actually have the claims examiner that's involved with the medical provider. We have occupational nurses that are assigned to those particular teams that also help with those particular claims. We have occupational doctors on staff that help with more difficult cases. We have a lot of different things that we do where we have even team leaders and things like that that are paying attention to this whole process, and claims managers. That's kind of something new for those folks that haven't realized that State Fund has kind of gone through a little bit of a change recently. Matter of fact, I'm no longer sitting where I once was. Now I'm down on the first floor, then the second floor. So we've actually been kind of moving teams around a little bit. And pretty much all of this should be kind of seamless for you guys. But anyway, this is kind of what's going on within State Fund. And this is where this first report comes into play. Without that information, we can't really file that process. Okay, we can't carry through with that process. So by filling out that first report and giving us as much information as you can possibly give us, that expedites the claims process. So what that means for you is that it saves time and money. Because when somebody's injured, the one thing that we do know is that when we provide more care up front, the necessary care up front, people heal faster. Those people that you try and hold back that care from and make them prove to you that they need the services and things like that, those are the folks that have a tendency to heal slower. The problems become more acute, becomes more problems. You end up putting more money towards that at the end of the claim rather than at the beginning of the claim. So one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we get those people that need care right up front. And the one way to do that is to give us as much information as we can, and that's where the first report comes into play. Okay? We want to make sure the injured employee gets the best treatment possible for them. Without it, we can't process that claim like I mentioned before. We have to have that information, but here's another little tidbit in this process. Without it, we can't even go out and get medical information from the medical providers because we have to show that we have an actual claim. And the only way that we can do that is to have that first report, and it has to be filed. It actually has to be signed. It can't just be the information, but the injured worker actually has to file that claim for us to be able to go out there and get those medical records to pay the bills and to understand what kind of treatment they're giving us or they're giving the injured employee, okay? First report can actually highlight some red flags, right? So you have an employee, let's say that on Friday, they're talking about going skiing for the weekend. They come in on Monday, and an hour into the workday, all of a sudden they're injured, okay? Would that be a red flag for you guys? Would that be maybe a concern, maybe that thought? Now, that doesn't mean that it's not a valid claim, but what that means is that there's something that occurred that you guys want an answer for, or that we want an answer for, that we want to clear up to make sure that this is a valid claim. Now, one of the things I'll tell you is that I don't think that fraud is that rampant, but there are people out there that are trying to fraud the system. And so one of the things that we have to do then is that you have to vet each one of those claims. And one of those things is to actually highlight what those red flags might be and actually take a look at those and get those answered, okay? It also starts the investigation. So if you go to the first report and you look, it'll actually say accident description, and it gives you a small block to work with. So it's not actually the investigation, it's just the description of what happened that you're going to start with. All right, so it's just the start of the accident investigation portion of this. So you want to understand what happened, but you also want to take a look at that, and that's where generally what will happen is the claims examiner will even do their informal investigation is they'll talk to people that were involved with this, the injured worker, talking to different folks. They'll interview folks over the phone and just kind of discuss some of those kind of things. But for you guys, you also want to be able to do that investigation. That first report gives you a starting point as well to do that, okay? One of the advantages to this also is that it cuts down on paperwork. So if you think about from the OSHA side of things, that you have to maintain an OSHA 300, a 300A, which is the summary, and on each one of those injuries, you need to have a 301. If you're using the first report and you're filling out the first report replaces the 301. So that does help you cut down on the amount of paperwork that you need within your organization. It also helps with the inception of communication. If you think of it this way, who's the one person that's talking to everybody? It's a claims examiner, right? The claims examiner is the one that's talking to the medical provider, that's talking to the injured worker, and is also talking to the employer. So one of the things that this does is it sets the basis for that communication, provides that extra additional information for the claims examiner to look over so that they're knowledgeable where to start looking at that particular accident. Also, what kind of medical stuff is being provided for that injured worker. Now, one of the things that we encourage, however, is because whenever you have an injury, one of the things it seems to do is damage that relationship between the injured worker and the employer. And so we want people to be able to communicate, especially if you have an injured worker. One of the best things you can do for yourself is to actually have discussions with your injured worker. Sometimes that gets a little bit strained in this process. Who better than the claims examiner to kind of help that process move along and actually help with that relationship, okay, between the worker and the employer. The other thing is the employer doesn't get to talk to the medical provider, do they? Now, initially, they can send information over that says, hey, we have a good return to work program, but after that point, the medical provider can't give any information out because of the HIPAA laws, so they can't really communicate with the employer. So the claims examiner is the one that can take some of that information that's not HIPAA and be able to kind of let the employer know kind of what's going on, but they're not letting out that personal information either. But they are someone that kind of bridges the gap over there between the medical provider and the employer so that they both kind of have an idea what's going on both ends of this, okay?